Welcome, friend, to another journey together. This evening, you'll uncover ancient wisdom that Buddhist teachers have cherished for generations to quiet the restless mind and nurture deep, healing peace. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I will offer a carefully curated selection of powerful Zen stories that have led countless people toward inner calm and the most peaceful rest they've ever known. Each story carries a sacred lesson that awakens your soul's innate ability to let go of stress and anxiety. What sets this apart from typical relaxation methods is that these enduring teachings work no matter your background with meditation. Even if your mind feels scattered, even if you've battled with unease before, the Buddha once noted, "Peace arises from within. Do not search for it outside yourself." Throughout the coming hours, you'll grasp precisely what this means and how to integrate it into your own life. As we journey through tales of inquisitive students, wise mentors, and life-changing insights, you'll sense something wonderful happening. Your shoulders will start to relax. Your breath will naturally slow and deepen, and you'll discover yourself gradually settling into a state of deep tranquility. So find your comfort now. Allow your body to sink completely into this present moment. Take one gentle breath alongside me. And as you let it go, recognize that you've just opened the doorway to a wisdom that has been quietly awaiting you through the ages. Our first story is about the unexpected nature of true enlightenment, set in the bustling city of Tokyo during the transformative Meiji era. This is a Buddha. In the heart of Tokyo, where ancient traditions met the rushing tide of modernization, two Buddhist teachers lived lives that appeared to be polar opposites. Unsho, a devoted instructor in the Shingon tradition, followed Buddha's precepts with unwavering discipline. Each morning, he rose before dawn for meditation, ate only until 11 o'clock, and never allowed a drop of alcohol to touch his lips. His life was a testament to rigid spiritual discipline, every action measured against the sacred rules handed down through centuries of Buddhist practice. Tanzan, meanwhile, served as a professor of philosophy at the prestigious Imperial University. His approach to Buddhist life seemed scandalous to many. When hunger arose, he ate regardless of the hour. When fatigue overcame him in the afternoon, he simply lay down and slept. He drank wine when the mood struck him and lived with an ease that appeared to mock the very foundations of Buddhist discipline. One afternoon, Unsho decided to visit his colleague, perhaps to understand how someone so seemingly careless about the precepts could still call himself a Buddhist teacher. He found Tanzan in his study, relaxing with a cup of wine, the golden liquid catching the light filtering through the paper screens. "Hello, brother," Tanzan greeted him warmly, gesturing toward a second cup. "Won't you have a drink?" Unsho's face tightened with disapproval. "I never drink," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of moral certainty. "Not even a single drop has ever touched my tongue." Tanzan regarded his visitor with gentle amusement. "One who does not drink is not even human," he observed casually, taking another sip. The words struck Unsho like a physical blow. His carefully constructed identity as a perfect Buddhist practitioner suddenly felt under attack. Heat rose in his chest, his breathing quickened, and anger flared in his eyes. "Do you mean to call me inhuman just because I do not indulge in intoxicating liquids?" he exclaimed, his voice rising with indignation. "Then if I am not human, what am I?" Tanzan smiled with profound gentleness and replied simply, "A Buddha." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at another. You are the one who gets burned. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the difference between attachment to spiritual rules and the freedom that comes from understanding their deeper purpose. Why do we so often confuse spiritual discipline with spiritual achievement? Zen Buddhism reveals that our attachment to being good or perfect practitioners can become the very obstacle to true awakening. Unsho's rigid adherence to precepts had created a subtle form of spiritual pride, a sense of superiority that made him judge others and defend his own identity as a proper Buddhist. Consider how often we fall into this same trap in our daily lives. We create rules for ourselves. I must meditate every day. I must eat only healthy foods. I must never lose my temper, and then use our success or failure at following these rules to measure our worth. When someone challenges our carefully constructed self-image, we react with the same defensive anger that Unsho displayed. Tanzan's apparent carelessness masked a deeper wisdom. By living freely, without attachment to appearing spiritual, he had transcended the need to prove his enlightenment to others or himself. His casual remark about drinking revealed his understanding that true humanity includes all aspects of our nature, not just the ones we deem acceptable. The profound irony of the story lies in Tanzan's final observation. In that moment of pure reaction, when Unsho's anger flared and his attachment to his spiritual identity became visible, he transcended his human conditioning. His passionate response revealed someone so committed to the Dharma that any perceived slight against it ignited his entire being. This total commitment, even expressed through anger, demonstrated a Buddha-like dedication to the path. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Unsho was rejecting what he saw in Tanzan's behavior based on his thoughts about how a Buddhist should act. Tanzan, seeing beyond surface appearances, recognized the Buddha nature burning brightly in Unsho's passionate response. This teaching challenges our conventional understanding of spiritual progress. We often believe that becoming more spiritual means becoming calmer, more controlled, more perfect. But true awakening sometimes reveals itself in moments of complete authenticity, even when that authenticity includes anger, confusion, or imperfection. The Buddha said, "Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth." Our Buddha nature cannot be concealed by our attempts to appear spiritual, nor can it be diminished by our apparent lack of spiritual perfection. It shines through our genuine responses to life, whether those responses fit our image of how an enlightened person should behave or not. Tonight, as you examine your own spiritual aspirations, can you notice where you might be attached to appearing awakened rather than simply being authentic? Can you see how your very passion for truth, even when expressed imperfectly, might be a sign of the Buddha nature already alive within you? As the Buddha taught, you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. The path to awakening often requires us to embrace this paradox, honoring both our inherent Buddha nature and our very human journey toward understanding it. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to live authentically in the face of social judgment. This is Shon and his mother. In the mountains of old Japan, where mist clung to ancient pines and temple bells echoed across valleys, a young monk named Shoan faced a choice that would define his spiritual path. When his father died, leaving behind an elderly mother who had depended on her family for care, Shoan could have followed the conventional path. He could have arranged for someone else to care for her, entered a monastery, and pursued his Zen studies in the traditional manner that society expected. Instead, Shoan chose love over convention. Wherever his studies took him, his mother accompanied him. When he visited meditation halls and monasteries, he couldn't live with the other monks because of his unusual situation. So he would build small, simple dwellings where he and his mother could stay together. To support them both, he copied sacred sutras and Buddhist verses, receiving modest payments that bought their food and met their basic needs. The real test of Shoan's resolve came in the marketplace. When he purchased fish for his mother's meals, people would whisper and point. "Look at the monk buying fish," they would scoff. "What kind of Buddhist teacher eats meat?" Their words carried the sting of social disapproval, the weight of tradition violated, the suggestion that Shoan was failing as a spiritual practitioner. But Shoan continued his practices with quiet dignity, unmoved by their criticism. His mother, however, felt the pain of each judgmental glance. She saw how others mocked her son and felt responsible for compromising his reputation. Finally, her heart heavy with concern, she approached him with a solution. "I think I will become a nun," she told him gently. "I can be a vegetarian too. Then people won't have reason to criticize you." And so she did. Mother and son studied the Dharma together. Their relationship transformed, but not diminished, by their shared spiritual commitment. Shoan had always been gifted with music and was a master of the harp. His mother learned to play as well, and on nights when the full moon illuminated their humble dwelling, they would create music together, their harmonies floating across the quiet landscape. One evening, as their music drifted through the night air, a young woman passing by was deeply moved by the beauty of their playing. She stopped outside their house, listening to the interweaving melodies that spoke of peace and devotion. Touched by what she heard, she approached them the next day and invited Shoan to visit her home and share his musical gift. Shoan accepted the invitation graciously, spending an evening playing music in her company. A few days later, when he encountered the woman on the street, he thanked her warmly for her hospitality, his manner reflecting the same natural kindness he showed everyone. But the gossips were watching. When they realized Shoan had visited the home of a woman who worked in the pleasure quarters, their whispers turned to outright scandal. "The monk visits prostitutes," they declared, their voices thick with moral superiority and delicious indignation. Again, Shoan remained untroubled by their judgment. He had shared music and human connection without attachment to the woman's profession or society's opinion of it. His heart remained clear, his purpose unchanged. Time passed, and Shoan's spiritual reputation grew despite the controversies. He was invited to teach at distant temples, sharing the wisdom he had cultivated through years of unconventional practice. During one such journey, while he was away delivering lectures, his beloved mother died peacefully in their home. When Shoan returned months later, he found that friends had already begun the funeral proceedings, not knowing how to reach him. Without hesitation, he walked to his mother's coffin and struck it firmly with his staff. "Mother, your son has returned," he announced. Then, speaking for her in the manner of their old conversations, he replied in her voice, "I'm glad to see you've returned, son." "Yes, I'm glad too," Shoan responded naturally. Turning to the assembled mourners, he declared simply, "The funeral ceremony is over. You may bury the body." Years later, When Shoan felt his own death approaching, he gathered his disciples and told them he would pass away at noon that day. He lit incense before pictures of his mother and his teacher, then wrote his final poem. For 56 years I lived as best I could, making my way in this world. Now the rain has ended, the clouds are clearing, the blue sky has a full moon. As his students chanted sutras around him, Shoan died peacefully, his unconventional life having demonstrated a profound truth about authentic spiritual practice. The Buddha once said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." The deeper teaching here shows us that authentic spiritual practice often requires us to choose love over social approval, compassion over convention. Why do we struggle so intensely with the opinions of others? Zen Buddhism explains that our need for social acceptance often conflicts with our deeper calling to live authentically. We fear judgment because we've learned to derive our sense of worth from external validation rather than internal alignment with our values. Shoan's story reveals three profound aspects of awakened living. First, he demonstrated that true spiritual practice sometimes requires breaking conventional rules in service of deeper principles. His choice to care for his mother, even when it prevented him from following traditional monastic life, embodied the Buddhist principle of compassion in action. Second, he showed us how to relate to criticism without defensiveness or reactivity. When people judged his choices, he neither argued with them nor changed his behavior to please them. He simply continued living according to his understanding of what was right, allowing others their opinions without taking those opinions into his heart as truth about himself. Third, his relationship with his mother's death demonstrated the Zen understanding that love transcends physical form. His conversation with her coffin wasn't denial or madness. It was recognition that their connection existed beyond the boundaries of life and death. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." Shoan embodied this paradox, living fully as himself while remaining open to growth and change. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and commitments that matter most to you, can you identify where fear of judgment might be preventing you from living authentically? Can you find the courage to choose love over approval, knowing that true spiritual practice sometimes requires us to walk a path others don't understand? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Shoan's entire life was that one word, lived with quiet consistency, despite the hollow words of criticism that surrounded him. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about the universal nature of spiritual truth. This is not far from Buddhahood. In the serene gardens of a traditional Japanese temple, where cherry blossoms drifted like snow and the sound of flowing water provided a constant gentle meditation, an elderly Zen master named Gasan received visitors from all walks of life. His reputation for wisdom drew seekers from distant provinces, scholars from great universities, and sometimes curious young students exploring the boundaries between different spiritual traditions. One afternoon, a university student approached Gasan with a question that reflected the intellectual curiosity of his generation. The Meiji period had opened Japan to Western ideas, and many young people found themselves caught between ancient Eastern wisdom and new Western philosophies. This particular student had been reading Christian texts and wondered how a Zen master might respond to teachings from such a different tradition. Master Gassan, the student said, bowing respectfully, have you ever read the Christian Bible? Gassan looked up from his tea, his eyes bright with interest. No, he replied simply. Read it to me. The student opened his leather-bound Bible, its pages worn from study, and began reading from the Gospel of Matthew. His voice carried clearly in the quiet space as he shared Jesus' words about worry and trust. And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Gassan listened with the complete attention that marked his approach to all teachings, whether they came from Buddhist sutras or unexpected sources. When the student finished reading, the master nodded thoughtfully. Whoever uttered those words, he said with genuine appreciation, I consider an enlightened man. Encouraged by this response, the student continued reading, sharing another passage that had particularly struck him. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For every one that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. Again, Gassan listened with full presence, allowing the words to settle into the silence before responding. That is excellent, he remarked with quiet enthusiasm. Whoever said that is not far from Buddhahood. In these simple exchanges, Gassan demonstrated a profound understanding that transcended religious boundaries and revealed the universal nature of awakened consciousness. As the Buddha observed, truth has no path, truth is living and therefore changing. Here we discover that wisdom recognizes itself wherever it appears, regardless of the cultural or religious context in which it arises. Why do we so often create artificial boundaries between different spiritual traditions? Zen Buddhism teaches that our tendency to compartmentalize wisdom stems from the ego's need to identify with particular groups, beliefs, or practices. We think our path is the only true path, our teachers the only authentic teachers, our understanding the only correct understanding. This creates what Buddhist psychology calls spiritual materialism, the use of spiritual concepts to reinforce our sense of separation rather than to cultivate genuine awakening. Gassan's response reveals several profound teachings about the nature of enlightened consciousness. First, he demonstrated that awakened awareness naturally recognizes truth wherever it appears. Just as the sun shines equally on all flowers, regardless of their species, enlightened consciousness sees the same essential wisdom, whether it's expressed through Buddhist koans, Christian parables, Islamic poetry, or Hindu scriptures. Second, his comment about being not far from Buddhahood reveals the understanding that Buddha nature, the potential for awakening, exists within all beings, regardless of their religious affiliation or cultural background. The historical Buddha was not the only person capable of enlightenment. He was simply one clear expression of the awakened consciousness that represents our deepest potential. Consider how this teaching applies to your daily encounters with wisdom. How often do you dismiss insights because they come from unexpected sources? Perhaps wisdom speaks through a child's innocent observation, a colleague's casual comment, or even a difficult person's challenging behavior. When we approach life with Gassan's openness, every interaction becomes a potential teaching. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense." This instruction encourages us to develop our own capacity to recognize truth, rather than accepting or rejecting ideas based solely on their source. Gassan's appreciation for Jesus' teaching about the lilies of the field reflects deep Zen understanding. The instruction not to worry about tomorrow echoes Buddhist teachings about the futility of mental proliferation and the importance of present moment awareness. The observation that lilies grow naturally without striving mirrors Zen concepts about effortless action and trust in our inherent Buddha nature. Similarly, his recognition of the passage about asking, seeking, and knocking demonstrates understanding that sincere spiritual inquiry naturally leads to insight. This aligns perfectly with Zen emphasis on the importance of don't know mind, the attitude of genuine questioning that opens us to direct experience rather than conceptual knowledge. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Gassan exemplified this wisdom by seeing the essential truth in Jesus' words, rather than rejecting them based on preconceived ideas about religious differences. This story also reveals that authentic spiritual understanding creates natural humility rather than superiority. Instead of claiming that Buddhism contains all truth and other traditions are inferior, Gassan demonstrated the confidence that comes from genuine realization, which naturally recognizes its own essence reflected in authentic teachings from any source. Tonight, as you encounter ideas, people, or situations that challenge your familiar ways of thinking, can you approach them with Gassan's openness? Can you listen for the wisdom that might be speaking through unexpected voices? Perhaps finding that truth appears in forms you hadn't previously recognized. The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Wisdom, like the flame of a candle, illuminates wherever it appears without diminishing its source. In recognizing this, we discover that the entire world becomes our teacher. Let us continue on our journey with a story about finding sweetness in the midst of life's greatest challenges. This is the strawberry. In one of his most profound teachings, the Buddha shared a parable that captures the essence of human existence and the possibility of joy, even in our darkest moments. Picture yourself in a vast, untamed wilderness where danger lurks behind every tree and safety feels like a distant memory. A man was traveling alone across an endless field, perhaps returning home from a long journey or seeking refuge in a distant land. The day was peaceful, birds sang in the trees, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. But suddenly, the tranquil silence was shattered by a terrifying roar that froze his blood. Behind him, crashing through the underbrush with predatory focus, a massive tiger appeared, its eyes locked on him with deadly intent. Terror propelled the man forward as he ran across the field, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The tiger pursued him relentlessly, its powerful muscles carrying it closer with each stride. Desperate, the man spotted a cliff ahead. At its edge, a wild vine hung down into the darkness below. Without hesitation, he grabbed the vine and swung himself over the precipice, the tiger's claws missing him by mere inches. Hanging from the vine, catching his breath, the man thought he had found salvation. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light below, his relief turned to despair. Far beneath him, pacing at the bottom of the cliff, another tiger waited with patient hunger, looking up at him as if he were a fruit about to fall from a tree. The man found himself suspended between two forms of death, trapped with nowhere to go. Above him, one tiger sniffed at the vine, its hot breath carrying the scent of previous kills. Below him, another tiger paced in circles, occasionally looking up with eyes that gleamed with anticipation. The vine creaked ominously under his weight, and he knew it wouldn't hold him forever. As he hung there in this moment of absolute helplessness, two mice appeared, one white and one black, and began to gnaw at the vine that held his life. With each tiny bite, the fibers of his lifeline grew thinner. Death seemed certain, and there appeared to be no escape from his predicament. But then, growing from a small crack in the cliff face within arm's reach, the man noticed a wild strawberry plant. On it hung a single, perfectly ripe berry, red as a ruby, and glistening with morning dew. Despite his desperate circumstances, despite the tigers above and below, despite the mice steadily weakening his only support, the man reached out with one hand. Grasping the vine firmly with his other hand, he carefully plucked the strawberry and placed it in his mouth. As his teeth broke through the delicate skin, sweetness flooded his senses. The taste was extraordinary, more delicious than any fruit he had ever experienced. For that perfect moment, nothing else existed but the exquisite flavor of the berry, its juice, its texture, its incredible sweetness. In that instant of pure presence, the man had discovered something profound about the nature of existence itself. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and life is available only in the present moment." This ancient wisdom illuminates the heart of human experience and our relationship to joy amid suffering. Why do we find it so difficult to taste the strawberries in our own lives? Zen Buddhism explains that we spend most of our time suspended between the tigers of past and future. The regrets, resentments, and painful memories that chase us from behind, and the fears, anxieties, and uncertain outcomes that wait for us ahead. Meanwhile, the mice of time steadily gnaw away at our sense of security, reminding us that nothing lasts forever. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your mental energy goes toward replaying past conversations you wish had gone differently? The job interview that didn't go well, the relationship that ended painfully, the words you wish you could take back. These are the tigers behind us, no longer real but still terrorizing us through memory. And how much anxiety do you carry about future scenarios that may never happen? The presentation next week, the medical test results, the conversation you're dreading, the financial insecurity that keeps you awake at night. These are the tigers below us, imaginary, but feeling completely real in their capacity to create suffering. Between these two tigers, time passes, represented by the white and black mice of day and night, steadily consuming our opportunities for genuine happiness. Each day that passes while we're consumed by past regrets or future fears is a day when we miss the strawberries right within our reach. Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "The present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it." This strawberry consciousness isn't about denying our difficulties or pretending that tigers don't exist. It's about recognizing that even in our most challenging circumstances, elements of beauty, sweetness, and joy remain available to us. Your strawberry might be the warmth of sunlight streaming through your window, the sound of laughter from children playing outside, the comfort of a hot cup of tea on a cold morning, or the simple miracle of breath entering and leaving your body. These experiences don't eliminate our problems, but they offer us moments of genuine nourishment that can sustain us through difficulty. The Buddha said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This teaching points us toward the power available in this moment. When we're fully present to what's actually happening right now, rather than lost in mental stories about past or future, we often discover resources and possibilities we couldn't see before. Zen practice teaches us to develop what might be called strawberry awareness, the capacity to notice and fully receive the gifts available in each moment, regardless of our circumstances. This doesn't mean becoming passive or ignoring real problems that need attention. Instead, it means approaching life's challenges from a place of presence and appreciation rather than from anxiety and depletion. Tonight, as thoughts of tomorrow's responsibilities or yesterday's disappointments arise, can you pause and look around for the strawberries in your immediate experience? Perhaps it's the softness of your pillow, the quiet of the evening, or simply the fact that in this moment you are safe and breathing. The Buddha taught, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. The strawberry reminds us that we don't have to wait for all our tigers to disappear before we can taste the sweetness that life offers. That sweetness is available right now, growing from the very cliff face of our difficulties, waiting for us to reach out and receive it. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the nature of effortless mastery and the subtle ways our minds can interfere with authentic expression. This is the first principle. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, where temple roofs curved gracefully toward heaven and centuries of artistic tradition lived in every carefully tended garden, stood the revered Obaku Temple. Visitors approaching its entrance would pause in wonder at the magnificent calligraphy carved above the gate. The characters reading the first principle were extraordinary in their power and beauty, each stroke flowing with a life that seemed to leap from the wood itself. Art lovers and calligraphy masters traveled great distances just to witness these letters, universally acclaimed as a masterpiece of the highest order. These remarkable characters had been created 200 years earlier by Kosen, a Zen master whose spiritual insight flowed naturally through his brush. But the story of their creation reveals a profound teaching about the relationship between mastery and self-consciousness, between effort and effortless action. When Kosen had been commissioned to create the calligraphy for the temple gate, he worked in his studio with careful preparation. A bold young student, eager to serve his master and perhaps demonstrate his own discernment, had prepared several gallons of rich black ink for the project. This student took his role seriously, perhaps too seriously, and had appointed himself as critic of his master's work. Kosen dipped his brush and began to write the characters for the first principle with focused attention. The brush moved across the paper with decades of trained precision, each stroke embodying years of practice and understanding. When he finished, he set down his brush and looked at his work with the eye of an experienced artist. The student leaned over the paper, examining the calligraphy with intense scrutiny. After a long moment, he shook his head disapprovingly. "That is not good," he pronounced with the confidence of youth. The energy is not quite right in the second character. Kosen accepted the criticism without defensiveness, understanding that mastery often requires patience with the learning process of others. He prepared fresh paper and began again, his brush dancing across the surface with renewed attention. This time, he paid particular attention to the flow of energy through each stroke, ensuring that his inner state remained calm and focused. Again, the student examined the work carefully, his brow furrowed with concentration. "Poor," he declared, his voice carrying even greater certainty. "Worse than before. The balance between the characters is not harmonious." And so the process continued. Paper after paper accumulated beside Kosen's writing mat as he attempted to satisfy his demanding critic. 20 attempts became 40, 40 became 60, 60 became 80. Each time, the student found fault with the master's work, his criticisms becoming more detailed and his rejections more emphatic. By the 84th attempt, Kosen had written the first principle so many times that the characters seemed to dance before his eyes. His hand moved with mechanical precision, but something vital had gone out of his work. The constant criticism had created a subtle tension in his mind, a self-consciousness that interfered with the natural flow of his artistic expression. Then, fortune intervened. The student stepped outside for a few moments, perhaps to stretch his legs or attend to some personal need. In his absence, a profound shift occurred in Kosen's consciousness. Now is my chance to escape his keen eye, he thought. But this thought brought with it an unexpected liberation. Free from the weight of constant judgment, Kosen felt his mind settle into a state of natural ease. The anxiety about producing the perfect calligraphy dissolved, replaced by the simple joy of brush-meeting paper. Without the burden of trying to impress or satisfy his critic, his hand moved with spontaneous grace, guided by decades of training that had become second nature. In a matter of moments, with a mind completely free from distraction and self-consciousness, Kosen wrote the first principle with effortless mastery. The characters flowed from his brush like water from a mountain spring, each stroke expressing the deepest essence of Zen understanding. When the student returned and saw the fresh calligraphy, his eyes widened with amazement. The difference was unmistakable. Where previous attempts had shown technical skill struggling against mental interference, this version radiated natural perfection. Every element was in perfect harmony, the energy was alive and dynamic, and the overall effect was breathtaking. "A masterpiece," the student exclaimed, his voice filled with genuine awe and recognition. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, when the mind is no longer divided, the way opens. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how our self-conscious efforts to perform perfectly can actually interfere with our natural capacity for excellence. Why do we struggle so often with performance anxiety and the fear of judgment? Zen Buddhism reveals that our attachment to producing specific outcomes creates a subtle tension that blocks the natural flow of our abilities. When we're focused on impressing others or meeting external standards, we divide our attention between the task at hand and our concerns about how we're being perceived. Consider your own experiences with creative work, athletic performance, or public speaking. Often, our best moments come when we're so absorbed in the activity itself that we forget to worry about how we're doing. The musician lost in the music, the athlete in the zone, the speaker who connects authentically with their audience, all share this quality of unself-conscious engagement. Kosen's 84 failed attempts weren't truly failures. They were necessary preparation. Each repetition was building his muscle memory, deepening his understanding of the characters, and paradoxically, creating the conditions for eventual effortlessness. But the breakthrough came only when he stopped trying to create a masterpiece and simply allowed his training to express itself naturally. The student's role in the story is equally important. His criticism, while seemingly harsh, served to reveal the subtle ways that external judgment can interfere with authentic expression. Many of us carry an internal critic similar to this student, constantly evaluating our performance and finding it lacking. This voice, whether internal or external, can paralyze our natural abilities. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Kosen's masterpiece emerged when he returned to beginner's mind, forgetting his expertise and simply enjoying the immediate experience of brush on paper. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching applies to our relationship with both criticism and praise. We can listen to feedback without being controlled by it, using our own direct experience as the ultimate guide. Tonight, as you engage in activities that matter to you, can you notice when you're performing for an imaginary audience versus simply doing what you love? Can you find moments where you forget to evaluate yourself and instead become absorbed in the natural flow of your attention and skill? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. True mastery emerges not through perfect technique, but through the marriage of skill and spontaneity, preparation and presence, effort and effortlessness. When we stop trying so hard to be perfect, we often discover that perfection was available all along. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Now, let us explore a story about the paradoxical nature of spiritual seeing and the limits of conceptual understanding. This is the teaching of 3 strikes and deeper vision. In the mountain monastery, where the 6th patriarch Hui Neng taught, students came from across China to study with the master, whose realization was said to surpass all others of his time. Among these seekers was a brilliant young monk named Shen Hui, known for his sharp intellect and probing questions. Unlike many students who approached the patriarch with humble requests for basic instruction, Shen Hui often challenged the master with sophisticated philosophical inquiries. One afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the monastery windows and the air carried the peaceful sounds of monks going about their daily practice, Shen Hui found the 6th patriarch sitting quietly in the main hall. The master's posture was perfectly still, his breathing soft and natural, his expression serene yet alert, the embodiment of meditation in action. Seeing an opportunity to test his understanding against the master's realization, Shen Hui approached with a question that had been forming in his mind during his own meditation practice. The nature of perception during spiritual practice had become a source of great curiosity and confusion for him. "High Master," Shen Hui said, bowing respectfully but speaking with the confidence of someone who believed his question particularly insightful. "When you sit in meditation, do you see or not?" To Shen Hui, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable inquiry into the mechanics of enlightened awareness. Did awakened consciousness involve special kinds of seeing? Did meditation reveal mystical visions or higher perceptions unavailable to ordinary minds? Or did true realization transcend seeing altogether, existing in some pure state beyond sensory experience? What he received in response was completely unexpected. Without warning, the sixth patriarch picked up his wooden teaching stick and struck Shen Hui 3 times in rapid succession, not gently, but with enough force that the blows stung sharply and left the young monk both physically uncomfortable and mentally bewildered. "When I hit you," the patriarch asked with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather, "does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui rubbed his smarting shoulders, his mind racing to understand what had just occurred. The question seemed simple enough, yet something about the context made him suspect that a straightforward answer might be inadequate. The physical sensation was undeniable, yet the spiritual implications felt complex. "It both does and does not hurt," he replied carefully, intuiting that the master was pointing towards some paradox beyond ordinary logic. "I both see and do not see," the sixth patriarch responded, his words carrying the weight of direct experience rather than philosophical speculation. But Shen Hui's intellect wasn't satisfied with paradox. He needed to understand the mechanics, to categorize and explain this teaching in terms his conceptual mind could grasp. "How can you both see and not see?" he pressed, genuine confusion evident in his voice. "That seems contradictory. Either you see during meditation or you don't. How can both be true simultaneously?" The patriarch's response came with the patience of someone who had spent decades helping students move beyond the limitations of dualistic thinking. "What I see," he explained with gentle clarity, "are the waverings and wanderings of my own mind. What I do not see is the right and wrong and good and bad of other people. This is my seeing and not seeing." With these words, the entire teaching crystallized. The master wasn't speaking about mystical visions or transcendent states, but about the fundamental shift in perception that accompanies genuine spiritual maturity. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching relates profoundly to the patriarch's lesson about the nature of awakened seeing. Why do we become confused when spiritual teachings transcend ordinary logic? Zen Buddhism explains that our conceptual mind operates through dualistic categories: seeing or not seeing, pain or no pain, right or wrong. But enlightened awareness doesn't eliminate these experiences. It transforms our relationship to them. The deeper teaching here shows us what authentic spiritual perception actually involves. The patriarch sees his own mental processes clearly, the arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and reactions. This isn't a mystical power, but the natural result of sustained mindfulness practice. He observes the waverings and wanderings of consciousness without being lost in them. Simultaneously, he doesn't see in the judgmental sense, imposing categories of right and wrong, good and bad onto others' behavior. This non-seeing isn't ignorance, but wisdom, recognizing that such judgments often say more about the observer than the observed. Look deeply at your own patterns of perception. how much of what you think you see in others actually reflects your own mental projections? When someone irritates you, are you seeing their actual behavior clearly, or are you seeing your own triggers and reactions? When someone impresses you, are you recognizing their genuine qualities, or are you seeing your own desires for approval or achievement? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between reactive perception and clear seeing. Reactive perception involves our past conditioning, our emotional needs, our judgmental habits. Clear seeing involves awareness that recognizes its own processes while remaining open to what's actually present. Zen master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This teaching points to the same insight the patriarch offered. True seeing involves turning attention toward our own mental processes rather than fixating on external judgments and evaluations. The 3 strikes Shen Hui received weren't punishment, but skillful teaching. Physical pain that both does and does not hurt points toward the mystery of conscious experience itself. Pain arises in awareness, is felt fully, yet doesn't define or limit the awareness that experiences it. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise in consciousness without contaminating its essential clarity. Consider how this teaching might transform your daily experience. Instead of constantly evaluating others' behavior, finding fault, making comparisons, generating opinions, what if you turned that same attention toward observing your own mental reactions? What patterns would you discover in the wanderings and waverings of your own mind? This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our capacity for discernment. Rather, we develop the ability to respond from clarity rather than reactivity. When we see our own judgmental tendencies clearly, we naturally become less caught in them. When we observe our mental projections, we're less likely to mistake them for objective reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called mirror mind, awareness that reflects whatever arises without being stained or changed by it. This mirror sees everything clearly while maintaining its essential emptiness and openness. Tonight, as you notice your mind categorizing and judging the experiences of your day, can you remember the patriarch's teaching? Can you turn your attention toward the seer rather than constantly evaluating what is seen? Can you discover the freedom that comes from seeing your own mental processes without being enslaved by them? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." By learning to see our own mental patterns with compassion rather than judgment, we develop the clarity to see others with equal kindness and understanding. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine. Ah, his friend replied thoughtfully. But perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets. This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. Of course, he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. How thoughtful of you. The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions, He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence. our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Now, let us explore a story about fearlessness and the power that comes from accepting what cannot be changed. This is the encounter between the general and the Zen master who could not be moved. During the violent civil wars that tore through feudal Japan, armies swept across the countryside like natural disasters, conquering villages and controlling territories through force and intimidation. When word spread that a particular warlord's army was approaching, most people would flee with whatever possessions they could carry, seeking safety in the mountains or with relatives in distant towns. In one small village, as the dreaded army drew near, the familiar pattern repeated itself. Families packed hastily, merchants closed their shops, and within hours, the streets that had been busy with daily life stood empty and silent. Everyone had fled. Everyone, that is, except the old Zen master who lived in the simple temple at the village center. When the conquering army arrived and found the village deserted, the general was surprised to discover smoke still rising from the temple chimney. Curious about who would have the audacity, or perhaps the foolishness, to remain when everyone else had fled, he decided to investigate this anomaly personally. The general approached the temple with several of his lieutenants, expecting to find either a frail old man too weak to flee, or perhaps someone who had been unable to escape in time. What he found instead was the Zen master sitting peacefully in his garden, tending to his plants as if nothing unusual was happening around him. The general had grown accustomed to fear and submission wherever his army went. Village leaders would prostrate themselves before him, pleading for mercy and offering tribute in hopes of avoiding destruction. Citizens would cower and flee at the mere sight of his soldiers. This old man's calm indifference to his presence was both puzzling and irritating. When he wasn't treated with the deference and submissiveness to which he was accustomed, the general's face darkened with growing anger. Here was someone who didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation or respect the power he represented. "You fool!" the general shouted, his voice echoing through the empty courtyard as he reached for his sword. His elaborate armor gleamed menacingly in the afternoon light, and his hand gripped his weapon with practiced ease. "Don't you realize that you are standing before a man who could run you through without blinking an eye?" The threat that had terrorized countless others left the master completely unmoved. He continued his careful tending of a small flowering bush, his hands steady and his expression serene. When he finally looked up at the general, it was with the same calm attention he had shown before, as if greeting any ordinary visitor to his garden. "And do you realize," the master replied with perfect equanimity, "that you are standing before a man who can be run through without blinking an eye?" The general stood speechless, his sword half drawn. His anger suddenly dissolved into something approaching awe. In all his years of warfare and conquest, he had encountered many forms of courage. The desperate bravery of cornered soldiers, the defiant rage of defeated enemies, the foolish boldness of young warriors. But he had never encountered anything like this. Complete acceptance without fear. Total peace in the face of death. The master's response revealed something the general had never considered, that there could be a power greater than the ability to kill, and that was the complete absence of fear about being killed. Here was someone who had so fully accepted the temporary nature of existence that even the threat of immediate death held no power over him. Slowly, the general returned his sword to its sheath. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the temple, leaving the master to continue his gardening in peace. The village remained untouched by the war, not because of any military strategy or negotiated protection, but because of one man's absolute fearlessness. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. Here we discover the profound power that emerges when we fully accept this fundamental truth, rather than spending our lives trying to escape it. Why does complete acceptance of mortality create such presence and authority? Zen Buddhism reveals that most of our fear comes not from external threats, but from our desperate clinging to what is inherently temporary. When that clinging dissolves, the threats themselves lose their power to disturb our inner peace. The general's power came from others' fear of death and loss, but someone who has fully accepted the temporary nature of existence cannot be threatened with what he has already willingly released. The master's fearlessness wasn't bravado or indifference. It was the natural result of understanding impermanence so completely that even his own death held no terror. Consider your own relationship with threats and intimidation in daily life. How much of your fear comes from attachment to maintaining your current circumstances, preserving your reputation, or protecting your physical comfort? The master's response suggests that true invulnerability comes not from being untouchable, but from having nothing that can be taken away. This doesn't mean being passive or welcoming harm. The master wasn't seeking death or encouraging violence. Rather, his complete acceptance of mortality's inevitability freed him from the paralyzing fear that controls most people when facing genuine danger. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The master's single response contained more power than any threat because it came from a place of absolute acceptance rather than resistance or fear. Tonight, as you consider the various pressures and threats you face, can you remember the master's profound response to the general's sword? Can you find the space where acceptance of impermanence creates not resignation, but a kind of unshakable presence that cannot be intimidated? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. True freedom comes not from avoiding danger, but from understanding so completely that we cannot ultimately be harmed, that external threats become powerless to disturb our essential peace. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply, "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached. But instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness and how can one realize it directly. If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer, between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected, rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self, that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been but perhaps never clearly seen. Our next story reveals a profound truth about how attachment can poison the very thing we claim to love. This is the tale of the chrysanthemum garden. In the countryside of ancient Japan, where autumn mists drifted through carefully manicured estates, there lived a wealthy baron whose passion bordered on obsession. His mansion stood proudly among rolling hills, but it was the rear garden that captured his heart completely. There, row upon row of chrysanthemums bloomed in magnificent splendor, their colors ranging from deep purple to golden yellow to pristine white. The baron devoted endless hours to cultivating these flowers, studying each variety with scholarly intensity, nurturing each plant with parental tenderness. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his dedication absolute. Yet this very devotion had transformed from love into something darker. The baron paid more attention to his chrysanthemums than to his wife and children. His household lived in constant fear, knowing that a single misstep near the precious flowers could result in severe punishment. Many retainers had felt his wrath for accidentally breaking off a blossom. The atmosphere had become oppressive, filled with anxiety and resentment. One autumn day, disaster struck. A faithful retainer, while hurrying to complete his duties, accidentally brushed against a prized chrysanthemum, breaking off its perfect bloom. When the baron discovered the damaged flower, his rage was volcanic. "Confinement!" he roared. The retainer was immediately imprisoned for this innocent accident. But the punishment felt so disproportionate that the retainer's shame transformed into desperate anger. According to the warrior code, he resolved to protest through seppuku, ritual disembowelment, preferring death to such humiliation over a mere flower. Word of this tragedy reached Zen master Sengai, a teacher known for his wisdom and compassion. Understanding that a man's life hung in the balance over botanical beauty, Sengai hastened to the estate and successfully prevented the suicide. But the master knew that saving one life would not solve the deeper problem. Sengai devised a radical solution. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were at their most glorious peak, he sneaked into the baron's garden carrying a sharp sickle. Working methodically in the darkness, he cut down every single chrysanthemum, hundreds of flowers representing years of cultivation. The sound awakened the baron, who rushed to his window and saw a shadowy figure in his beloved garden. Grabbing his sword, he ran outside in alarm, demanding to know what this intruder was doing. Sengai stood calmly amid the devastation, surrounded by fallen blooms. "Even weeds like this eventually become rank if they are not cut," he replied with perfect equanimity. In that moment, the baron's obsession shattered like breaking glass. Seeing his flowers reduced to mere weeds in the master's eyes, he suddenly understood the distortion in his perception. It was like awakening from a fevered dream. From that night forward, the baron never raised chrysanthemums again. The Buddha taught, "Attachment is the root of suffering." This ancient wisdom illuminates what the baron discovered through Sengai's dramatic intervention. When we cling too tightly to anything, even beautiful things, we transform love into possession and beauty into burden. This profound truth reveals itself in the way attachment corrupts the very thing we claim to cherish. The baron genuinely loved chrysanthemums, but his attachment had poisoned that love, turning appreciation into obsession, care into control, and beauty into a source of fear for everyone around him. Why do we confuse love with possession? Buddhism explains that the ego mind seeks security through control, attempting to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. True love appreciates without grasping, enjoys without owning, cares without controlling. But attachment love tries to freeze beauty in place, to make the beloved an extension of our own identity. Consider how this pattern manifests in modern relationships. Parents who love their children so intensely that they become controlling, suffocating the very growth they claim to support. Partners who love so possessively that they create jealousy and mistrust. Collectors who become so attached to possessions that they lose the joy of experiencing what they own. The chrysanthemums represent anything we elevate beyond its proper place in the natural order. This might be our career success, our physical appearance, our spiritual achievements, or our carefully curated lifestyle. When we become too attached, we create suffering not only for ourselves, but for everyone in our orbit. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the delicate balance between appreciation and attachment. We can love something fully while holding it lightly, caring deeply while remaining unattached to outcomes. Sengai's radical action demonstrates the sometimes shocking medicine required to break through deep-seated attachment patterns. Sometimes we need external circumstances to strip away what we're clinging to before we can see clearly. Loss, disappointment, and impermanence, while painful, often serve as teachers, revealing the difference between genuine love and possessive attachment. Notice that the baron doesn't simply moderate his gardening. He stops completely. This suggests that sometimes the most skillful response to attachment is temporary, complete withdrawal until we can relate to the object of attachment with greater freedom and wisdom. Tonight, as you reflect on your own life, what might be your chrysanthemum garden? What do you love so intensely that it creates stress, control, or suffering for yourself or others? Can you imagine appreciating these things fully while holding them more lightly? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. True love sets free what it cherishes, trusting in the natural flow of arising and passing away. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master was sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him. the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Let us continue on our journey with a cautionary tale about the perils of spiritual superiority. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its abundant wildlife and scenic beauty. The prince, surrounded by his attendants and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys dwelling in the forest caught sight of the royal party, they fled in terror. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic display with remarkable skill and apparent indifference to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate leaps and displaying his dexterity as if putting on a show. His movements were fluid and confident, each gesture demonstrating his superior agility and intelligence compared to his cowering companions. The Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary display with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to mock the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey dexterously caught the arrow in mid-flight, plucking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey examined the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such feats were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this humiliation. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack!" he ordered his attendants. "Bring down this arrogant beast." A volley of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, could not deflect them all. In an instant, he was struck by multiple arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his extraordinary abilities proving useless against such overwhelming force. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Puyi, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened," the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on distinction and talent when you deal with men." Yen Puyi absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he reflected on how his own accomplishments and reputation might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. He quietly became the disciple of a humble sage, seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special. He renounced the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every distinction that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yen Puyi cultivated such genuine humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so unassuming, that people began to sense something profound in his very ordinariness. Thus, they held him in awe, not for what he displayed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." This tale unveils the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel compelled to demonstrate our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego co-opts even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and superiority. The very achievements that should dissolve the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride operates. Like the monkey, we may develop genuine abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom illuminates a paradox at the heart of spiritual development. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility, because it reveals the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving any basis for feeling superior to others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of don't know mind as the essence of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our conceptual understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey's tragedy was believing his cleverness made him special rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Yenpui discovered that by hiding his distinctions, by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more profound kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Consider your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or compassionate actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity, we create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from demonstrating your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace. The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that attempt to contain it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily ritual of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was infectious, bounding ahead to retrieve sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was brilliant, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex philosophical concepts. Yet this very intelligence had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist texts, the more contradictions he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating obstacles rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that intellectual brilliance could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a mathematical equation. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only guideposts. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager enthusiasm. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the luminous orb and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger extended clearly toward the celestial body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable. His gaze fixed intently on the teacher's outstretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically reserved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing digit, completely oblivious to the moon hanging magnificently above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally, regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and luminous, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha observed, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching addresses the exact confusion that plagued the bright student, mistaking concepts about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become a barrier when we rely on it exclusively. The student's brilliant mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixated on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they attempted to indicate. Why do we become trapped in conceptual understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth transcends these dualistic distinctions. It cannot be captured in concepts any more than the moon can be held in a photograph. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are inadequate for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same ineffable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern manifests in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake accumulation of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the territory. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy photographing that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our conceptual knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be discarded once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable complexity of modern life, can you distinguish between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own innate wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with diligence. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they indicate. Now, let us experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment. This is the kitchen monk's realization. In the serene mountains surrounding Lake Hakone stood a great monastery known throughout Japan for its rigorous practice and deep wisdom. Among the monks lived a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the profound difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi had labored faithfully in the monastery kitchen, while other monks sat in formal meditation or engaged in scholarly debates. Ichi chopped vegetables, tended fires, and prepared meals with quiet dedication. His hands had grown permanently stained, his back bent from years of service, yet he approached each task with careful attention. But Ichi carried a heavy burden. Since his earliest days, he had been assigned a koan, one of those paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to crack open the thinking mind. His was the famous puzzle: what is the sound of one hand clapping? Day after day, year after year, he wrestled with this question, trying to solve it through logic, intuition, every approach his mind could devise. As decades passed, Ichi began to see himself as a failure. While other monks seemed to progress, receiving new koans or achieving insights their teachers acknowledged, Ichi remained stuck with his unsolved puzzle. He watched younger monks arrive and eventually surpass him in status and recognition. 55 years, he would whisper while stirring soup. 55 years, and still I cannot hear what one hand sounds like when it claps. The question haunted him through every chore, every quiet moment, every season of his long service. Now, as his body grew frail, Ichi knew his time was approaching its end. He had been moved to a small attic room where he could rest away from daily bustle. As he lay there, in the gathering twilight of his life, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to solve his koan, the shame of perceived failure, the constant reaching for enlightenment, all of it slowly dissolved like mist at sunrise. Gone was the fierce desire for awakening that had driven him for decades. In place of all that seeking, Ichi discovered something he had never expected, a profound peace that seemed to cradle his entire being. The soft darkness felt not like defeat, but like the gentlest embrace. His breathing slowed, and with it, the churning of thoughts that had occupied his mind for so many years. It was in this exquisite silence, when there remained no more questions nor need for answers, when even the need for breathing seemed to fade into quiet acceptance, that Ichi finally heard it. The whooshing silence of one hand clapping filled his awareness, not as a sound, but as the very nature of existence itself, the sound that had been present all along beneath all the noise of seeking. Buddha spoke of this when he said, Cease to cherish opinions, and you will achieve enlightenment. Here we discover that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we uncover when the effort finally ceases. Why do we struggle so intensely with the very seeking that prevents us from finding what we seek? The mind creates a fundamental split between the seeker and the sought, keeping us perpetually reaching for something we imagine exists elsewhere, in some future moment when we'll finally get it. Ichi's story illuminates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals and achievements. For 55 years, he had sophisticated simple presence into complex spiritual ambition. The more expertly he sought enlightenment, the further he moved from the naturally enlightened awareness that had been with him all along. Consider how often we create this pattern. We complicate natural joy with the pursuit of happiness. We obscure natural love with the search for perfect relationships. We cover natural wisdom with endless accumulation of knowledge. Ichi's realization came not through solving his koan, but through finally letting go of the need to solve it. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a riddle to be figured out, but an invitation to rest in the space before thinking begins. The awareness that exists prior to questions and answers. Tonight, as thoughts about your own spiritual journey arise, remember Ichi's profound discovery. What if the very awareness that notices your seeking is the enlightenment you've been seeking? The sound of one hand clapping might be closer than you think, in the very listening that hears all sounds, including silence. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what has always been present. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between submission and genuine understanding. This is the lesson of the proud priest and the gentle master. Master Bankei had gained quite a reputation throughout the region. Unlike other teachers who filled their talks with complex philosophical arguments and lengthy quotations from ancient texts, Bankei spoke directly from his heart to the hearts of his listeners. His words were simple but profound, accessible to farmers and scholars alike. People from all walks of life, merchants, servants, samurai, and monks, gathered to hear him speak about the natural peace that exists within every person. The master's growing popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nichiren sect, whose own temple had grown noticeably emptier as his followers left to hear about Zen. This priest had built his identity around being learned, respected, and obeyed. He prided himself on his knowledge of scriptures and his ability to win theological debates. The idea that a simple Zen teacher could attract his devoted followers with plain speaking felt like a personal insult. Determined to expose what he assumed must be shallow teaching disguised as wisdom, the Nichiren priest stormed into one of Bankei's gatherings. He pushed through the crowd of seated listeners, his robes billowing dramatically, his face stern with righteous indignation. The peaceful atmosphere of quiet attention was suddenly charged with tension as people turned to see what was happening. "Hey, Zen teacher!" the priest called out loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. The deliberate rudeness of his address was unmistakable. He was treating the revered master like a common street performer. "Wait just a minute. I have something to say to you." Bankei looked up calmly from where he sat, showing no sign of irritation or defensiveness at the interruption. His eyes held the same gentle attention he gave to every person who approached him, whether they came with genuine questions or hostile challenges. All these people here respect you and will obey whatever you say, the priest continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his challenge. But a man like myself does not respect you at all. Can you make me obey you? Can your so-called wisdom compel someone who sees through your simple tricks? The crowd held its breath, expecting either an angry response or a learned rebuttal that would put this arrogant challenger in his place. Instead, Bankai smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth and curiosity. "Please come up beside me," the master said gently, "and I will show you." The priest, feeling triumphant that he had provoked a response and confident in his ability to expose whatever manipulation was about to unfold, proudly pushed his way through the crowd to the front of the hall. He stood beside the master's simple cushion, his chest puffed out with self-importance, ready to demonstrate his independence from this supposed authority. "Thank you," Bankai said with the same gentle smile. "Now we might hear each other better if you come over to my left side. Please step over here." Without thinking, the priest moved to Bankai's left side. It seemed like a reasonable request after all. "Actually," Bankai continued thoughtfully, "perhaps we could speak more clearly if you were on my right side instead. Would you mind stepping over there?" Again, the priest complied automatically. It was such a small, sensible adjustment that he didn't even notice he was following instructions. Bankai's smile deepened, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. "You see," he observed quietly, "you are already obeying me. And I think you are actually a very gentle, cooperative person. Now please sit down and listen to what I have to share." The priest stood frozen, suddenly realizing what had just happened. He had come to demonstrate his independence and superiority, but had instead revealed his natural willingness to respond cooperatively to kind, reasonable requests. His whole argument had dissolved not through force or clever rhetoric, but through his own unconscious behavior. The crowd remained silent, but many people were struggling not to smile. They had witnessed something remarkable, not a defeat or humiliation, but a gentle revelation. The master had shown that true influence comes not from demanding obedience, but from inviting natural cooperation. The priest felt his anger and arrogance melting away, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. How had this simple man accomplished what felt like magic? How had he transformed a hostile confrontation into a moment of mutual understanding without ever raising his voice or asserting his authority? Still somewhat dazed by the experience, the priest sat down. As Bankai began to speak again, the words seemed to bypass his analytical mind and speak directly to his heart. For the first time in years, he listened not to find flaws or prepare counter-arguments, but simply to hear what was being offered. Buddha's wisdom tells us, true obedience is not blind submission, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between the compliance that comes from fear or social pressure and the natural cooperation that arises from genuine understanding. Why do we so often confuse authority with authoritarianism, influence with coercion? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning around power. We assume that getting others to cooperate requires force, manipulation, or the assertion of superiority. But the deepest teaching here shows us that true leadership emerges from understanding human nature, not from overpowering it. The priest came expecting to encounter someone who would try to dominate him because that was the only model of authority he knew, when instead he met someone who simply invited his natural cooperativeness, his entire framework for understanding power and influence was gently challenged. Consider your own experiences with authority. The teachers, bosses, or leaders who most positively influenced your life. Did they command your respect through force, or did they earn it by appealing to your better nature? The difference is profound. Forced compliance creates resentment and resistance, while invited cooperation creates genuine change. In our daily relationships, we often fall into the same trap as the priest. We approach conflicts assuming we need to overpower others to get what we want. We prepare arguments, marshal our defenses, and ready ourselves for battle. But Bankei's approach suggests a different possibility. What if we assumed the best about others and invited their natural wisdom to emerge? Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over." The priest's aggression came from his own insecurity and fear of being displaced. Bankei's genius lay in seeing past the hostile surface to the suffering underneath, then responding to the suffering rather than the aggression. This doesn't mean being passive or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Bankei maintained clear boundaries and didn't submit to the priest's demands for a debate. Instead, he redirected the energy of the encounter towards something more constructive. He transformed a potential power struggle into a teaching moment. The Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. This principle applies not just to obvious hatred, but to all forms of resistance and conflict. When we meet resistance with resistance, we simply create more tension. When we meet resistance with understanding, we create space for transformation. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and situations in your life where you feel the need to assert your will or defend your position, can you remember the gentle master who never commanded obedience, yet received complete cooperation? Can you find ways to invite others' natural wisdom rather than trying to overpower their resistance? As the Buddha observed, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. True authority comes not from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom to help them discover their own desire to cooperate in creating something beautiful together. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. "I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles," the psychiatrist said. "I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people?" The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. "I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions," the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding." The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, doubt everything, find your own light. Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions, when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved. They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the master's method aims for the root rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions, the completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing? As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within, Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible." The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through?" "Is the ocean, yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves. The same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body. The awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear. The life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point towards the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the phantoms we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years, their love deep and genuine, their companionship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grasped her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her impending departure, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided social gatherings, declined invitations, and turned away from any possibility of female companionship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed, and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Conversations led to friendship. Friendship deepened into affection. And eventually, despite his guilt and internal conflict, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears materialized. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the unmistakable figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance. It was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him, recounting in perfect detail everything that had transpired between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, reveal their most intimate exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so intense that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes, his hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and exhaustion. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "my dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his account, the master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure materialized, the man followed the master's instructions precisely. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the apparition. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked uncertain, even confused. I cannot," she stammered, and then, like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unresolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external forces, but from the phantoms we create through our own psychological patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and conditioning, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Consider how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken, or standards you failed to meet. These internalized critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners, but their power comes entirely from our own minds giving them substance. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no independent existence. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his conditioning told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her psychologically present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the phantom's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or psychological projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true, they're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's accusations felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know. What others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their validity, to challenge their authority over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these internal critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief, the moment we see them for what they truly are, not supernatural visitations, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. Tonight, as we complete our journey together, can you recognize that the peace you seek is not separate from your present awareness? Can you feel how the wisdom we've explored is not distant but immediately available in your direct experience? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The ultimate truth is not hidden on a sacred mountain or in ancient texts, but in the miracle of ordinary awareness, the silent witness that has been present throughout our entire journey together. As we draw our time together to a close, let us reflect on the path we've traveled. Each moment of contemplation has offered a unique doorway into understanding, yet all point to the same essential truth, that peace, clarity, and awakening are available here and now, not in some distant future or special circumstance. We have discovered that life's challenges need not overwhelm us when we learn to respond rather than react. We've explored how the present moment, fully received, contains everything we need for contentment. The wisdom of impermanence has shown us that change, rather than being our enemy, can become our teacher. We've learned that true generosity flows naturally when we recognize our interconnectedness with all beings. Through our exploration, we've seen how assumptions and judgments often create more suffering than the circumstances themselves. We've touched the understanding that genuine strength comes not from resistance, but from flexibility and acceptance. The power of presence has revealed itself as both our refuge and our teacher, always available, yet often overlooked in our busy lives. We've examined how equanimity, that quality of inner balance, allows us to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs with grace. The practice of letting go has shown us that releasing what no longer serves us creates space for what truly nourishes. We've discovered that attention, when focused and undivided, becomes a powerful tool for transformation and insight. Most importantly, we've recognized that the spiritual path is not about acquiring something new, but about uncovering what has always been present. The journey inward reveals that what we seek through external means, peace, joy, understanding, are qualities of our own true nature, temporarily obscured, but never truly absent. As you prepare for rest, remember that these insights are not mere concepts to be stored away, but living truths to be embodied. They invite you to experience each moment with greater presence, compassion, and wisdom. The teachings we've shared tonight are seeds that will continue to grow in the fertile ground of your daily experience. The Buddha taught that three things cannot remain hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. As you continue on your own path, may the truths we've explored together remain with you, not as burdens to carry, but as gentle companions illuminating your way. May they remind you that in every moment, regardless of circumstances, the opportunity for peace and awakening is yours. Thank you for sharing this journey with us at Sleepy Monk. May you rest peacefully, waking refreshed and carrying these timeless teachings into the light of a new day.